The snow came down so thick that Sarah Finch could barely see her own hands gripping the reins, but she kept riding because stopping meant her father would catch her, and she would rather freeze to death in this God-forsaken blizzard than go back to that house. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago, maybe two. She had lost track of time when the world turned into nothing but white wind and the desperate thundering of her horse's hooves beneath her. The animal was struggling now, its breath coming in ragged gasps that tore at Sarah's heart, but she could not stop, not yet, not ever. Behind her somewhere in that wall of white was her father and whatever men he had managed to rouse from the saloons in Roswell. And if they found her, they would drag her back and lock her away until she agreed to marry Carlton Hayes, the 53-year-old cattle baron who had paid her father $3,000 for the privilege of owning her like livestock. She was 19 years old, and she would die free before she lived as that man's property. The wind screamed across the New Mexico plains with a fury that seemed personal, as if winter itself had taken offense to her desperate flight. This was December of 1884, and Sarah had lived in Roswell long enough to know that blizzards like this were rare but deadly. The town sat in a valley where the winters were usually mild, but when the storms came down from the mountains, they came with vengeance and people died. She knew this. She had accepted it when she threw her few belongings into a saddlebag and climbed out her bedroom window 3 hours before dawn. Her horse stumbled, and Sarah's heart lurched, but the mare caught herself and pushed forward. The animal was loyal, had been Sarah's companion since her 16th birthday when her mother was still alive, and the world still made sense. Her mother had died 2 years ago from pneumonia, and her father had descended into drink and gambling debts that piled up like cordwood. Sarah had tried to hold things together, had taken in sewing and laundry, had sold her mother's jewelry piece by piece, but it was never enough. And then Carlton Hayes had come to dinner one night with his cold eyes and his thin smile, and Sarah had known what was coming before her father even told her. "You will marry him," her father had said, whiskey on his breath and shame in his eyes that he tried to hide with anger. "You will do your duty to this family." "I would rather die," Sarah had told him, and she had meant it. So here she was, dying perhaps, but on her own terms. The world tilted suddenly, and Sarah realized her horse was going down. She tried to throw herself clear, but her frozen limbs would not obey, and she hit the ground hard with the mare collapsing beside her. The impact drove the air from her lungs, and for a long moment she could not breathe, could not think, could only lie there in the snow while the wind howled overhead. The horse tried to rise, failed, tried again. Sarah forced herself to move, to crawl through the snow to her mare's side. The animal's eyes were rolling white with panic and exhaustion. "I am sorry," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. "I am so sorry, girl." She tried to stand, but her legs would not hold her. The cold had sunk deeper than she realized, into her bones, into her blood. She was wearing 2 dresses, one over the other, and her heaviest coat, but it was not enough. Nothing was enough against cold like this. She crawled a few feet and then stopped, her body simply refusing to go further. The snow was already covering her, soft and almost gentle, like a blanket being pulled up by a loving hand. This was how it ended then. Frozen on the plains, miles from anywhere, with her horse dying beside her and her father's curses still ringing in her memory. At least Carlton Hayes would not have her. At least she had that. She closed her eyes. She did not know how long she lay there before she heard the voice. It seemed to come from very far away, muffled by the wind and snow and the growing fog in her mind. Holy God, there is someone out here. Strong hands rolled her over, and Sarah tried to open her eyes, but her lashes were frozen together. Someone was brushing snow from her face, and then she was being lifted, cradled against warmth that felt like fire against her frozen skin. "I have got you," the voice said, and it was a man's voice, deep and steady. "Stay with me now, do not go to sleep." Sarah wanted to tell him that she was not going to sleep, that she was dying, but her mouth would not form the words. She felt herself being moved, felt the world shifting around her. And then there was the smell of horse and leather, and she understood dimly that she was being placed on a saddle. The man climbed up behind her, one arm locked around her waist, holding her against his chest. "Your horse," Sarah managed to whisper. "I will come back for her if I can," the man said. "Right now I need to get you somewhere warm or you are going to die." They moved through the storm, and Sarah drifted in and out of awareness. She was conscious of the man's heartbeat steady against her back, of his voice speaking to his horse in low, calm tones, urging the animal onward. Time became meaningless. There was only the cold and the wind and the warmth of this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to speak. When she opened her eyes again, they were in some kind of shelter. Not a house, but a cave or an overhang, something that blocked the wind. The man was laying her down on a bedroll, and then he was building a fire with quick, efficient movements. Sarah tried to sit up, but her body would not cooperate. "Lie still," the man said without looking at her. "You need to warm up slow or it will shock your system." The fire caught and light bloomed in the darkness. Sarah turned her head and got her first real look at her rescuer. He was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair that curled at his collar and a face that was all hard planes and angles, weathered by sun and wind. He wore a heavy coat and chaps, and there was a rifle propped against the cave wall within easy reach. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were a startling blue, the color of the sky on a clear winter morning. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. "Sarah," she said. "Sarah Finch." "I am Marcus Zimmerman," he said. "Most people call me Mark. What in God's name were you doing out in this storm?" "Running," Sarah said, and then to her horror she felt tears starting to freeze on her cheeks. "I was running away." Mark did not press her for details. He pulled off her boots with gentle hands and began rubbing her feet, trying to restore circulation. The pain as feeling returned was excruciating, and Sarah bit her lip to keep from crying out. "I know it hurts," Mark said quietly, "but if I do not do this, you could lose your toes to frostbite." "Can you move your fingers?" Sarah tried and found that she could, barely. Mark nodded and kept working on her feet, methodical and patient. When he was satisfied, he wrapped them in a blanket and then sat back, studying her face in the firelight. "Your horse is in bad shape," he said. "I went back for her while you were unconscious. She is here in the cave with us, but I do not know if she will make it through the night. I am sorry." Fresh tears came, and Sarah did not try to stop them. That mare had been her last connection to her mother, to the life before everything fell apart. "Thank you for trying," she managed to say. Mark nodded and turned his attention to building up the fire. Sarah watched him through heavy eyelids, studying the way he moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his whole life outdoors. He had the calloused hands of a working man, and there was a quiet competence about him that made her feel safer than she had felt in months. "This storm is going to last through the night," Mark said, settling back against the cave wall. "Maybe into tomorrow. We are stuck here until it passes." "Where are we?" Sarah asked. "About 15 miles northeast of Roswell, up in the hill country. I was checking on a line shack when I saw you collapse. Pure luck that I was out here at all." He paused. "Who is chasing you?" Sarah closed her eyes. She was too tired to lie, too cold and broken to maintain pretenses. "My father," she said. "And probably Carlton Hayes's men by now, Carlton Hayes the rancher." "Yes." Mark was quiet for a long moment. "I have heard of him. He has a reputation for getting what he wants." "He wants me," Sarah said bitterly. "He paid my father for me like I was a horse or a piece of land. They were going to marry me to him whether I agreed or not." "Jesus," Mark said softly, "so I ran." Sarah opened her eyes and looked at him. "I would rather die out here than be his wife." "I know that probably sounds dramatic, but I mean it." "It does not sound dramatic," Mark said. "It sounds like the truth." He was quiet again, and then he said, "I cannot take you back to Roswell. If your father is looking for you, that is the first place he will search." "I know," Sarah said. "I was trying to get to Santa Fe. I have an aunt there, my mother's sister. I thought maybe she would take me in." "Santa Fe is 100 miles from here, through mountain passes that will be snowed in for weeks after a storm like this." Mark rubbed his jaw, thinking. "I work for the Diamond Z Ranch about 30 miles north of here. The owner is a good man, fair and honest. He might be willing to give you work, at least until spring when the passes clear." "Why would you help me?" Sarah asked. "You do not know me. For all you know, I am a thief or a liar." Mark looked at her steadily. "Are you?" "No." "Then I am helping you because it is the right thing to do, and because no woman should be forced to marry a man she does not want." His voice was matter-of-fact, as if it were really that simple. "Get some rest. We will figure out the details in the morning." Sarah wanted to stay awake, wanted to ask him 100 questions about himself and his life, and why he was really willing to risk his employer's displeasure by bringing home a runaway bride. But exhaustion was pulling at her like an undertow, and the warmth of the fire was making her limbs heavy. She let her eyes drift closed, and within moments she was asleep. She dreamed of her mother's face, kind and sad, and woke to find gray light filtering into the cave and Mark crouched by the fire, cooking something that smelled like coffee and salt pork. Her horse was lying near the back of the cave, still breathing but clearly weak. "How do you feel?" Mark asked when he saw she was awake. "Sore," Sarah admitted, "but alive. That is more than I expected last night when I found you." He handed her a tin cup of coffee and she wrapped her hands around it gratefully, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. "The storm has not let up. We are staying put for now." They spent the day in the cave, waiting out the blizzard. Mark had supplies in his saddlebags, enough for a few days, and he shared them without hesitation. They talked in fits and starts, the conversation punctuated by long silences that were surprisingly comfortable. Sarah learned that Mark had grown up in Wyoming, that his parents had died when he was 17, that he had drifted south working various ranch jobs until he landed at the Diamond Z 3 years ago. He was a horsebreaker primarily, though he did whatever work needed doing. "You like it?" Sarah asked. "The ranch work, I mean," Mark shrugged. "It is honest work and Mr. Zachary treats his men fair. The land out here gets in your blood after a while. I cannot imagine living in a city now, all those people crammed together." He looked at her. "What about you? What did you do before all this?" "I helped my mother with her sewing business when she was alive," Sarah said. "After she died, I tried to keep it going, but I did not have her skill. I took in laundry, did cleaning for some of the wealthier families in town. It was not much, but it was mine, you know. I was supporting myself." "That must have taken courage," Mark said. "It took desperation," Sarah corrected. "My father gambled away everything my mother left. I was trying to keep us from starving, and he repaid you by selling you to Hayes." "Yes." The bitterness in Sarah's voice surprised even her. "He could not even look me in the eye when he told me. Just kept saying I had to understand that it was for the family, that Hayes would take care of me." "Hayes is 30 years older than you," Mark said flatly. "He has buried 2 wives already. That is not taking care of you, that is buying himself a possession." The bluntness of his words, the anger underneath them, made Sarah feel less alone somehow. Mark understood. He did not try to soften what her father had tried to do or make excuses for it. He just called it what it was. Night fell again, and they settled in to wait out the darkness. Sarah's mare died quietly sometime around midnight, and Mark helped Sarah cover the animal with blankets, a makeshift burial until they could leave the cave. "I am sorry," Mark said again, and Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. By morning the storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed into white silence. They packed up Mark's camp and set out, riding double on his horse, a sturdy bay gelding that Mark called Copper. The going was slow through the deep snow, and they had to stop frequently to rest the horse. Mark was careful to keep them to the high ground where the wind had blown some of the snow clear, and he seemed to navigate by instinct, always knowing which direction to turn. They spent 2 more nights camping under the stars before they finally reached the Diamond Z Ranch. It was a sprawling operation with a large main house, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals. Cattle dotted the snowy landscape, dark shapes against the white. As they rode up to the main house, a man came out onto the porch, tall and broad-shouldered with silver hair and a weathered face. "Mark," the man said, his voice carrying across the yard. "We were starting to worry about you, boy. That was one hell of a storm." "Yes, sir, Mr. Zachary," Mark said, dismounting and then helping Sarah down. "I ran into some trouble out there. This is Miss Sarah Finch. She needs help." Mr. Zachary's eyes were sharp as they took in Sarah's appearance. The exhaustion and fear she knew must be written on her face. "Come inside," he said. "Both of you. Let us get warm and then we will talk." The interior of the ranch house was warm and well appointed, with solid furniture and colorful rugs on the floor. A woman came bustling out from what Sarah assumed was the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 50, with kind eyes and graying blonde hair. "Goodness, Mark, you look half frozen," the woman said. "And who is this?" "My wife, Elizabeth," Mr. Zachary said. "Elizabeth, this is Miss Finch. She has had some trouble." Over hot food and coffee, Mark told the story, or at least the parts that mattered. Sarah was grateful that he kept it brief, did not elaborate on her father's betrayal or Carlton Hayes's reputation. "Mr. and Mrs." Zachary listened without interrupting, and when Mark finished, Mr. Zachary leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Hayes is a powerful man in these parts," he said slowly. "If he wants you found, he will have men looking." "I know," Sarah said quietly. "I am not asking you to put yourself at risk. If you could just give me a few days to rest, maybe loan me a horse, I will head north to Colorado. I have some money saved. I can find work somewhere." "Nonsense," Mrs. Zachary said firmly. "You are not going anywhere in this condition, and certainly not alone. Samuel, we have plenty of work around here. The girl can stay and earn her keep until this business blows over." Mr. Zachary nodded slowly. "Elizabeth is right. We can use help with the cooking and cleaning, especially with spring roundup coming. You can stay in the bunkhouse apartment we keep for visiting family. It is small but private." Sarah felt tears prickling her eyes again. "I do not know how to thank you." "Thank us by working hard and staying out of trouble," Mr. Zachary said, but his tone was not unkind. "Mark, you will be responsible for her. Make sure she learns the routine around here. Introduce her to the other hands. And Miss Finch, if anyone comes asking questions, you are Elizabeth's niece from Kansas City, come to help out for the season." "Understood." "Yes, sir," Sarah said. "Good. Now both of you get some rest. You look like you have been through a war." The apartment turned out to be 2 small rooms above the stable, simply furnished but clean and warm. Mrs. Zachary brought Sarah some clothes that had belonged to her daughter, who was now married and living in Albuquerque, and a thick quilt for the bed. Mark helped Sarah carry up some firewood and made sure the stove was working properly. "Thank you," Sarah said when they were alone, "for everything. You saved my life." Mark looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You would have done the same for me." "I do not know if I would have had the courage," Sarah said honestly. "Most people would not want to get involved." "Then most people are cowards," Mark said bluntly. He moved toward the door and then hesitated. "I am in the main bunkhouse if you need anything." "It is the long building past the corrals. Just ask for me." "I will," Sarah said. After he left, Sarah sat down on the bed and let herself cry, really cry, for the first time since this whole nightmare began. She cried for her mother, for her horse, for the life she had lost and the uncertain future ahead. But underneath the grief there was something else, something that felt almost like hope. She had escaped. Against all odds, she was free. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Sarah worked alongside Mrs. Zachary in the big house, learning to cook for a ranch full of hungry men, to do laundry in the big copper tubs, to mend clothes and sheets and saddle blankets. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done in Roswell, but it was satisfying in a way that surprised her. Mrs. Zachary was patient and kind, teaching Sarah ranch recipes and frontier practicality. The older woman asked no prying questions, seemed content to let Sarah's story remain her own. Mark was around often, coming in for meals with the other hands or stopping by to help with heavy lifting. Sarah found herself watching for him, her heart lifting when she heard his voice or caught sight of him working in the corrals. He was good with the horses, patient and gentle, never using force when a soft word would do. The other ranch hands clearly respected him, and Sarah understood why. He was steady, reliable, the kind of man who did what he said he would do. They fell into an easy friendship, talking while Sarah helped him brush down horses in the evening or when they both happened to be getting water from the well at the same time. Mark told her stories about the ranch, about the other hands and their quirks, about the land and the animals. Sarah found herself telling him things she had never told anyone, about her mother's dreams for her, about the loneliness of the last 2 years, about the fear that had been her constant companion since her father's announcement. "You think they are still looking for me?" she asked one evening in early January. They were in the stable, Mark mending a bridle while Sarah cleaned tack. "Probably," Mark said honestly. "But the storm covered your tracks and no one saw us come in. As far as anyone knows, you disappeared into the blizzard. They might assume you died." "My father will tell himself that," Sarah said. "It will be easier than admitting what he tried to do." Mark looked at her, his blue eyes serious. "You do not owe him anything, Sarah, not your forgiveness and certainly not your future." "I know," Sarah said, "but he is still my father. I cannot help wondering if he regrets it, if he even thinks about me." "If he does, it is his burden to carry, not yours," Mark said. He set down the bridle and came to stand beside her. "You are safe here. I promise you that." The intensity in his voice made Sarah's breath catch. They were standing close, close enough that she could smell the soap he used and see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, and her heart raced at the possibility. But then Mark stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should let you finish up," he said. "Early day tomorrow." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. After he left, she stood there for a long time, her hands trembling, trying to understand what was happening to her. She had known Mark for less than a month, but already he felt essential, like someone she had been waiting for without knowing it. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. February came, and with it, the first signs of spring. The snow began to melt, and the cattle grew restless, ready for fresh grass. Sarah had settled into life on the Diamond Z, had made friends with some of the other women who lived on the ranch, wives and daughters of the hands. She felt safe for the first time in years, felt like she was building something real, but she could not stop thinking about Mark. They spent more and more time together, finding excuses to be near each other. Mark taught her to ride properly, patient with her nervousness after losing her mare. They went on long rides through the hills, exploring the ranch's vast acreage, and Sarah felt herself falling, tumbling headlong into feelings she had never experienced before. This was not the polite courtship she had seen in Roswell, careful and controlled. This was wild and overwhelming, a connection that felt inevitable. One evening in late February, they were sitting by the creek that ran through the ranch property, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Mark had been quiet all day, and Sarah could sense something weighing on him. "What is wrong?" she asked finally. Mark picked up a stone and threw it into the water, watching the ripples spread. "I have been thinking," he said slowly, "about the future, about what happens when spring comes and the pass is clear and you can go to Santa Fe if you want." Sarah's heart clenched. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," Mark said, and the word came out fierce, almost angry. He turned to look at her. "No, Sarah, that is the last thing I want, but I do not know what you want. I do not know if you are just staying here because you have nowhere else to go, or if you are staying because you want to be here, with me." Sarah's pulse was racing. "Mark?" "I am in love with you," Mark said, the words tumbling out like he had been holding them back too long. "I have been since that first night in the cave when you told me you would rather die than give up your freedom. You are the bravest, strongest person I have ever met, and I know I am just a ranch hand with nothing to offer you but a hard life and uncertain prospects. But I love you, Sarah. I love you, and I need to know if there is any chance you could feel the same way." For a moment Sarah could not breathe, could not think, and then she was moving, closing the distance between them, taking his face in her hands. "I love you," she said, the words feeling like a prayer. "I have loved you since you pulled me out of the snow and refused to let me die. I love you, Mark." He kissed her then, soft and then deeper, and Sarah felt like she was finally, truly home. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Mark rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but marry me anyway. Let me spend the rest of my life keeping you safe and making you happy." "Yes," Sarah said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." They told Mr. and Mrs. Zachary that night, and the older couple beamed with genuine happiness. Mrs. Zachary hugged Sarah tightly and whispered, "I knew from the first day he brought you here that something special was happening." They were married in early March by a circuit preacher who passed through the area. A simple ceremony in the ranch house parlor with all the hands and their families in attendance. Sarah wore a blue dress that Mrs. Zachary had altered to fit her, and Mark wore his best shirt and a string tie. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Mark kissed her like she was precious, like she was everything, and Sarah felt happiness so intense it was almost painful. Mr. Zachary gave them a small house on the ranch property as a wedding gift, a 2-room cabin with a stone fireplace and a view of the mountains. It was more than Sarah had ever dreamed of having, and she and Mark spent their first weeks of marriage making it into a home, hanging curtains and building furniture and planning a garden for the spring. The work on the ranch intensified as spring roundup approached. Mark was gone long hours, and Sarah kept busy helping Mrs. Zachary and the other women prepare food for the hands. But every evening Mark came home to her, tired and dusty and smelling of horses, and Sarah would heat water for him to wash and have dinner waiting, and they would sit together and talk about their day like it was the most natural thing in the world. It was in late April when the trouble finally found them. Sarah was hanging laundry outside the cabin when she saw a group of riders approaching the main house. Something about the way they moved, purposeful and aggressive, made her stomach clench with fear. She dropped the shirt she was holding and ran toward the house, her skirts tangling around her legs. Mark was in the corrals and he saw them too. He vaulted the fence and started running, reaching Sarah just as she got to the house. Mr. Zachary was already on the porch, his rifle held loosely in his hands, his face grim. The riders stopped in the yard and Sarah's blood turned to ice. Her father was there, looking older and more haggard than she remembered, and next to him on a black stallion was Carlton Hayes. He was exactly as she remembered, cold-eyed and thin-lipped, his gaze sweeping over the ranch like he owned it. "Samuel Zachary," Hayes said, his voice carrying across the yard. "I am told you are harboring a runaway, a woman named Sarah Finch who is promised to me in marriage." "I am harboring no runaway," Mr. Zachary said calmly. "Everyone on this ranch is here legally and of their own free will." "Then you will not mind if we look around," Hayes said, already dismounting. "I mind a great deal," Mr. Zachary said, and now there was steel in his voice. "This is private property and you are trespassing. State your business or leave." Sarah felt Mark's hand on her arm, felt him trying to pull her back into the house, but she could not move. Her father had seen her, his eyes widening with recognition and something that might have been relief or might have been fear. "Sarah," her father said hoarsely, "thank God, we thought you were dead." "She is married," Mark said, stepping forward. His voice was level, but Sarah could feel the tension in him, could sense him preparing for a fight. "Sarah is my wife, legally married by a circuit preacher. She is not going anywhere with you." Hayes's face darkened. "That marriage is not valid. She was promised to me. Her father accepted payment." "Payment for a human being," Mark said, his voice hard now. "That is called slavery, Mr. Hayes, and last I checked it is illegal in this country." "How dare you?" Hayes started, but Mr. Zachary cut him off. "The boy is right. Whatever arrangement you had with her father is void. Sarah is an adult, and she made her own choice. Now get off my land before I have you arrested for trespassing." "You do not have the authority," Hayes said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. The other ranch hands had gathered, a silent wall of men behind Mr. Zachary, and Hayes was smart enough to know he was outnumbered. Sarah found her voice finally, stepping forward before Mark could stop her. "Father," she said, and her voice shook but held. "I am not coming back. I am happy here. I have a husband and a home and a future. Let me go." Her father looked at her, really looked at her, and Sarah saw the moment he understood that he had already lost her, that he had lost her the moment he tried to sell her. His shoulders sagged. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "Sarah, I am so sorry." "Then honor that apology by leaving me in peace," Sarah said. "Go home, father, let me live my life." For a long moment nobody moved. Then her father turned his horse around, not looking at Hayes, not looking at anyone. "I am done," he said. "She is right, let us go home." Hayes sat rigid in his saddle, fury radiating from him. "She is mine. I paid for her." "Then I suggest you try to get your money back," Mr. Zachary said flatly, "because she is not leaving this ranch. Now get out of here before I lose my patience." Hayes stared at Sarah with naked hatred, and she stared back, refusing to flinch. Finally, he wheeled his horse around and spurred it into a gallop, his men following. Sarah's father cast one last look back at her, his face full of regret, and then he was gone too, disappearing down the road in a cloud of dust. Sarah's legs gave out and Mark caught her, holding her against his chest while she shook. "It is over," he murmured into her hair. "It is over, Sarah. They are gone." "You think they will come back?" Sarah asked. "No," Mr. Zachary said, coming down from the porch. Hayes is too smart to push this any further. He knows he has no legal standing, and he knows that if he tries anything, every ranch in this valley will hear about it. His reputation would be ruined. He smiled at Sarah, kind and reassuring. "You are safe, girl, for good this time." That night, lying in Mark's arms in their small cabin, Sarah finally let herself believe it. She was free. Not just free from her father and Carlton Hayes, but truly free to build the life she wanted with the man she loved. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Mark asked sleepily. "For finding me in the storm, for bringing me here, for loving me." Mark tightened his arms around her. "I would ride through 1,000 storms for you, Sarah Zimmerman. You are my whole world." The years that followed were not always easy. Ranch life was hard, full of long hours and uncertain weather and the constant threat of drought or disease. But Sarah had never been happier. She worked alongside Mark, learning the rhythms of the land and the animals. She made true friends among the other ranch families, women who valued her for her strength and her kindness. And she fell more in love with her husband every single day. In the spring of 1886, Sarah gave birth to their first child, a boy they named Thomas, after Mark's father. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair, and he was healthy and loud and perfect. Mark held his son for the first time with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face, and Sarah knew that she had given him something precious, a family of his own to love and protect. More children followed. A daughter named Lucy in 1888, with Sarah's green eyes and a stubborn streak a mile wide. Another son, James, in 1890, quieter than his siblings but with a gift for gentling horses that rivaled his father's. They filled the little cabin with noise and laughter and love, and Sarah sometimes had to pinch herself to believe it was all real. Mr. Zachary made Mark a foreman in 1891, recognizing his skill and dedication. With the increased pay, Mark was able to buy a small piece of land adjoining the Diamond Z, and they began building a larger house, planning for the future. Sarah planted a huge garden and learned to preserve food for the winter, skills that Mrs. Zachary taught her with patience and pride. Sarah's father died in 1893. She learned about it from a telegram sent by a lawyer in Roswell, informing her that he had left her his house, the only thing of value he still owned. Sarah thought about it for a long time, and then wrote back instructing the lawyer to sell the house and give the money to the church. She did not want anything from her father, except the peace of knowing he was gone. Carlton Hayes died 2 years later, thrown from his horse in a riding accident. Sarah felt nothing when she heard the news, not even satisfaction. He was just a name from a past life, a danger that had never materialized, and she wasted no more thought on him. As their children grew, Sarah told them the story of how she and their father met, carefully edited for young ears but honest about the important parts. She wanted them to know that love was worth fighting for, that freedom was precious, and that sometimes the hardest choices led to the most beautiful outcomes. Mark remained her partner in all things, steady and strong and endlessly patient with their boisterous children. He taught the boys to ride and rope, taught Lucy that she could do anything her brothers could do. He kissed Sarah every morning before he left for work and every night when he came home, and he still looked at her, sometimes like he could not quite believe she was real. In the summer of 1899, when Sarah was 34 and Mark was 40, they stood on the porch of their completed house and watched their children play in the yard. Lucy was 15 now, beautiful and fierce, already catching the eye of the young ranch hands. Thomas was 13 and serious, talking about becoming a veterinarian. James was 9 and currently covered in mud from trying to catch frogs in the creek. We did well. Mark said, slipping his arm around Sarah's waist. "We did," Sarah agreed, leaning into him. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not found you that day?" Mark asked. "No," Sarah said honestly, "because you did find me, and everything else followed from that. We cannot change the past, and I do not want to. Every moment, good and bad, led us here." Mark kissed her temple, gentle and sweet. "I love you, Sarah Zimmerman." "I love you too," Sarah said. "I will love you until the day I die, and probably well beyond that." They stood there as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, their children's laughter ringing through the evening air. Sarah thought about the girl she had been, terrified and half-frozen, fleeing through a blizzard with no clear plan except to stay free. She thought about the young cowboy who had pulled her from the snow and given her not just safety but a future. And she thought about everything they had built together, a life full of love and purpose and belonging. The blizzard had almost killed her, but instead it had saved her, leading her straight into the arms of the man who would become her everything. Sometimes, Sarah thought, the worst storms in life were really just blessings in disguise, terrible and beautiful and transformative all at once. Years continued to pass in that way time does on the frontier, marked by seasons and harvests and the growing of children into adults. Thomas went off to veterinary school in 1903, making the family proud when he returned with his degree and set up practice in a neighboring town. Lucy married a rancher's son in 1905 in a beautiful ceremony that had Sarah crying happy tears into Mark's shoulder. James stayed on the ranch, taking over more and more of the daily operations as Mark and Sarah grew older. By 1910, Sarah was 45 and Mark was 51, and they had 4 grandchildren with another on the way. Their hair was touched with gray now, and there were lines around their eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but they were healthy and happy and still very much in love. They had survived droughts and hard winters, had weathered economic downturns and personal losses, and through it all they had each other. One evening in late autumn, they rode out to the spot where Mark had first proposed, by the creek that still ran clear and cold through the ranch. The cottonwood trees were golden with fall colors, and the air had that crystalline quality that comes just before the first snow. "You remember that first night in the cave?" Sarah asked, leaning back against Mark where they sat together on a blanket. "When you told me we were stuck there until the storm passed. I remember thinking you were the most stubborn woman I had ever met," Mark said, amusement in his voice. "Half frozen, and you still had fire in your eyes. I knew right then you were going to be trouble." "Good trouble, I hope," Sarah said. "The very best kind," Mark said, kissing the top of her head. "Sarah, I have been thinking. James is more than capable of running the day-to-day operations here. What would you say to taking some time for ourselves? Maybe traveling a bit, seeing some of the country." Sarah turned to look at him, surprised. "You want to leave the ranch?" "Not permanently," Mark said quickly. "Just for a while. I want to show you the ocean, Sarah. I want to take you to San Francisco and Denver and all the places we have talked about but never seen. We have worked hard our whole lives. Maybe it is time we enjoyed the fruits of that labor." Sarah considered this, a smile slowly spreading across her face. "I think that sounds wonderful," she said. "Let us do it. Let us go on an adventure." They spent the winter planning their trip, poring over maps and train schedules, making lists of places they wanted to see. Thomas and Lucy thought it was a marvelous idea, and James assured them repeatedly that he could handle the ranch in their absence. In the spring of 1911, Sarah and Mark boarded a train heading west, their hearts full of excitement and possibility. They spent 3 months traveling, and it was like a second honeymoon. They saw the Pacific Ocean, and Sarah wept at its vastness. They ate in fancy restaurants and stayed in nice hotels and held hands like young sweethearts. They visited art museums and attended theater performances, and sent letters back to their children filled with descriptions of everything they were experiencing. But as wonderful as it all was, Sarah found herself getting homesick after a while. She missed the ranch, missed the wide open spaces and the smell of sage after rain. She missed her grandchildren and the comfortable rhythms of the life they had built. "I am ready to go home," she told Mark one evening as they sat on a beach in California, watching the sun set over the water. "Me too," Mark admitted, looking relieved. "This has been incredible, but home is where I want to be, with you on our land surrounded by family." They returned to New Mexico in early summer, tanned and rested and full of stories. The ranch looked just as they had left it, green and thriving under James's capable management. Their grandchildren swarmed them with hugs and questions, and Sarah felt her heart expand with love for all of them. Life settled back into its familiar patterns. Sarah spent her days helping with the grandchildren, teaching the granddaughters to sew and garden, listening to the grandsons' grand plans and dreams. Mark still rode out every day, his body older but still strong, his love for the land undiminished. They played cards with friends in the evening and went to church on Sundays and celebrated holidays with their growing family gathered around their large dining table. In the fall of 1915, Sarah and Mark celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. The whole family gathered at the ranch for a party that lasted into the night, with music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Thomas made a speech about how his parents were the finest example of true love he had ever seen, and Lucy presented them with a quilt she and her sisters-in-law had made, each square decorated with a scene from Sarah and Mark's life together. When Sarah and Mark finally got back to their house late that night, exhausted but happy, they stood in their bedroom and looked at each other with the same wonder they had felt as newlyweds. 30 years, Sarah said softly. "Has it really been that long?" "Feels like yesterday and forever at the same time," Mark said, pulling her close. "I meant what I said that night by the creek, Sarah. You are my whole world. You always have been." "And you are mine," Sarah said, reaching up to touch his face, memorizing the lines and angles she knew better than her own. "Thank you for loving me, Mark. Thank you for giving me a life I could never have imagined." "Thank you for letting me find you in that storm," Mark said. "Thank you for saying yes." They held each other in the darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. Outside the window, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to the moon. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying with it the smell of sage and earth and home. Sarah thought back to that desperate girl fleeing through the blizzard, certain she would die but determined to die free. She thought about the cowboy who had appeared out of the snow like an answer to a prayer, strong and steady and true. And she thought about all the years in between, full of love and laughter and hard work and family. It had not been an easy life, not by any stretch. There had been grief and loss, worry and uncertainty. But it had been a good life, a life rich with meaning and connection and purpose. Sarah had everything she had ever wanted and so much more than she had ever dared to hope for. As she drifted off to sleep in Mark's arms, safe and warm and loved, Sarah sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the blizzard that had driven her into the storm, for the cowboy who had found her, for every moment that had brought them to this place, this life, this love. She had been fleeing death that day, running blindly through the snow with no destination in mind except away. But what she had really been running toward, though she did not know it then, was home, Was Mark, was everything that came after. Sometimes, Sarah thought as sleep finally claimed her, the most terrifying moments of our lives are really just the beginning of something beautiful. Sometimes, we have to lose everything to find what truly matters. And sometimes, when the storm is at its worst and hope seems lost, salvation appears in the form of a blue-eyed cowboy on a bay horse, ready to lead us to safety and love and home. The years rolled on, each one adding another layer to the foundation Sarah and Mark had built together. They grew old gracefully, their love deepening with each passing season. There were more grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren, little ones who called them Nana and Papa, and climbed into their laps to hear stories about the old days. Mark's hair went completely white, but his blue eyes remained as sharp as ever. Sarah's hands developed arthritis that made sewing difficult, but she learned to work through the pain, determined to make quilts for each new baby born into the family. They moved a bit slower, needed more rest, but their minds stayed clear and their hearts stayed full. In 1925, on a warm spring day when the wildflowers were blooming across the hills, Mark and Sarah rode out to their special spot by the creek one last time. Mark was 70 now, and though he would never admit it, Sarah could see that the years were weighing on him. But he sat tall in the saddle, just as he had 41 years ago when he pulled her from the snow. They spread a blanket and sat together in companionable silence, watching the water flow past, listening to the birds sing in the cottonwoods. This land had been their whole world, the backdrop for a love story that had exceeded Sarah's wildest dreams. "I would do it all again," Mark said suddenly, taking Sarah's hand in his. "Every single moment exactly the same way. I would ride through that storm 1,000 times if it meant finding you." "I know," Sarah said, squeezing his fingers gently. "I feel the same way. You gave me everything, Mark. A life, a family, a love I did not even know existed. How can I ever thank you enough for that?" "You do not need to thank me," Mark said. "Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." They sat there until the sun began to set, painting the sky in those familiar shades of orange and pink and gold. And as the first stars appeared overhead, Sarah leaned her head on Mark's shoulder and felt completely, utterly at peace. Whatever years they had left, they would face them together, just as they had faced everything else. And when their time finally came, they would go knowing that they had lived fully, loved deeply, and built something that would outlast them both. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried their legacy forward, proof that love could triumph over fear, that courage could be rewarded, and that sometimes the darkest storms led to the brightest dawns. Sarah Zimmerman, who had once been Sarah Finch, closed her eyes and smiled. She had been so afraid that day in the blizzard, certain she was riding to her death. But really, she had been riding toward her destiny, toward the arms of the man who would become her everything, toward a future more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow, and Sarah held tight to the hand of the cowboy who had saved her, who had loved her, who had given her the world. And she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, living exactly the life she was meant to live, with exactly the man she was meant to love. It was, by any measure, a perfect ending. But more than that, it was a perfect life, built one day at a time through blizzards and sunshine, hardship and joy, always together, always in love. From the moment Mark pulled Sarah from that snow until the day many decades later when they would leave this earth within months of each other, their hands intertwined in the way they had been since that first desperate night in the cave. Theirs was a love for the ages. A love that began in a storm and lasted through every season that followed, strong and true and unbreakable. A love that proved, beyond any doubt, that sometimes the best things in life come from the most terrifying moments, and that salvation often arrives just when we need it most, in the form of a stranger who becomes our home,